Welcome to this week's episode of DeepTech315. That's Doug. I'm Gene. Our three topics today is Nvidia makes some product announcements. Second is Apple considering working with third parties for its foundation model. And last is we have a new public company, a pure play in social, that being Reddit. And taking it back to the top, the week kicked off with commentary with the Woodstock of chip events. I heard that there was like 10,000 people at this event. Crazy to think like all this momentum has been sucked from Apple over to these Nvidia events. Pretty geeky audience, but they're the ones who are really powering this AI paradigm shift. And Jensen made good on all the predictions related to the event and announced the B100 chip. That replaces effectively, that will replace later this year, the H200, which is kind of the high-end chip from Nvidia now. Specs are roughly twice as fast for the B100 over the H200. And so kind of the easy analysis here is that this was largely expected given the lead up to it and things kind of leaked out, which is pretty normal for these big tech events. But there's some more substance behind this in terms of how it could impact, I think, the business more near term.
Yeah, this is just a hypothesis, something that we've been talking about internally. We've kind of seen this in the past with Apple, for example, when they release, or they're at least known for, let's say, a pretty regular device update schedule. And for some people, when they're about to upgrade their phone, particularly when the rumors are that the new iPhone upgrade will be a meaningful one, sometimes we see this Hawthorne effect. We've talked about this before, even with Tesla, where customers wait and they say, look, I'll just wait for the next generation one. You know, I can suffer through another year with my current iPhone. And again, this is just a hypothesis, but we've kind of been talking internally, given how powerful the B100 is. And right now, Nvidia is selling the H200, so a good upgrade.
Let me interrupt
from
you there, Doug.
H100.
The B100, how powerful, I kind of framed it in, it's 2x the speed power of the H200. Is that the right way to think about it?
It is. I think that is right. I mean, ultimately, you think about it in terms of total cost of ownership. That's what Jensen likes to talk about. So, you know, I forget what his exact saying is, but something to the effect of, if you buy chips, you think about the price of chips. If you build data centers, you think about what is my total cost of ownership. And so if you can get a chip that is 2x more efficient at handling these kinds of workloads and not pay 2x more to purchase the hardware, install it, et cetera, then you should have an advantage in terms of total cost of ownership, which is what it's all about.
Makes sense.
So back
yeah,
to
I
the
interrupted
Hawthorne
you. You're
effect.
talking about the Hawthorne effect.
Yeah, I think it's worth asking, and I wouldn't even say that this should be a base case, but it's worth asking. Could Nvidia see an air pocket here in the next quarter or two, as customers know the B100 now is coming later this year? Do any customers, pull back a little bit on their orders and say, look, we'll pass on a few 100,000, let's say, of the H200s. We'll put that into B100s. I would say, I think it's possible, and I like to try to put things into probability. It's probably unlikely that that happens, because we do have this really, I think, acute arms race right now to get compute for AI. But I think it's at least worth thinking about, if we were going to see one of those air pockets, and people have kind of talked about this, when could we see a slowdown in Nvidia's demand? Maybe those are some of the ingredients that could go into it.
Yeah, maybe the read would be if Nvidia gets through their next quarter is the April quarter, so they're going to report that call at the end of May, but they get through the April quarter and they don't talk about a slowdown in demand. I mean, bucking the Hawthorne effect here, I think, is, you could read this as like doubly positive for Nvidia, that they buck the trend, that 10% chance didn't happen, and I think that would be reaffirming for the kind of this idea we're still early in this. Was that it? A lot of attention. Was it the B100? Anything else? Jensen talked about this, making chips more affordable for the masses. And was he talking about that total cost of ownership piece, or like a lower price chip?
I think he's always sort of referencing some of the total cost of ownership thing. That's what it always kind of goes back to for Nvidia when they think about, okay, what is the value we're creating ultimately? It's not just about the raw price of the chip. I would say, though, the price of the B100, talk about affordability, It was a little bit lower, I think, than people were expecting. He had said the price is going to be somewhere in that, $30 to $40,000 range. He's been out in the media saying that. I've seen a $38,000 number online, I believe. And so, that was a little lower than I think some people were thinking it could be, kind of in the 40 to 50 range. So, maybe the chip is coming in a little bit more cost effective or cheaper. Hard to say cheaper at $38,000, but cheaper than maybe people expected.
Let's shift to the second topic, kind of breaking news. Late Sunday, early Monday morning, Doug, you sent me an email. I was on vacation. I read it early in the morning, and I knew my day was going to be very different than what I thought when I went to bed on Sunday night. And that, of course, is Mark Gurman, who does great work at Bloomberg in terms of he's just got some incredible network inside of Apple. But reporting that Apple is working or considering working with Google to license their Gemini Foundation model and also OpenAI. And the previous day to this, to kind of bring all the pieces into this, is Apple had basically put out a white paper suggesting or saying that they are working on a multimodal model of themselves. And so there's like three things floating around here. My reaction when I saw the news was this is really good for Google because it's validating. We've talked about all the challenges that Google has had, but validating for Google. The second piece is I couldn't remember when Apple has licensed like a core competency. I mean, they'll license some patents, but this is very different than, Apple's been bringing core competency in-house over the past decade, a lot with the chip design pieces and getting into services. And it feels like this vertically integration mindset. And so it to me just hit at how fast Apple needs to move at this, or maybe how far behind they are, that has gotten them to a point that they're considering licensing Gemini to do some features, AI powered features. They may use their own model, Gemini. And so that was my initial reaction was, man, things are changing a lot. This obviously after them canceling the Titan project. And it just feels like they've got a fire lit under them.
It does. And I would maybe invert one thing you said a little bit in terms of Apple being far behind. I actually think it's more about how far ahead OpenAI and Google, as much as we've sort of criticized them for being slow with their AI rollout and development, really about how far ahead they are than everybody else. And I think that this sort of integrates a little bit with another piece of news that came out yesterday, which is that Inflection, which is a highly well-funded startup. They had a couple of their co-founders leaving to join Microsoft to start AI. Microsoft's basically AI lab division there. And I think that that's kind of a sign for how hard it is. This company raised over $1 billion to build large language models. It's hard. It's hard to build a really unique and dynamic model without access to unique data, which we all know Google has. Obviously, tremendous resources. But then the distribution too that we've talked about, which not only aids in getting the product used, but also refining the product and making it better when you get feedback from users. So I would actually give it more of a, hey, look how far ahead and just the reality of the AI game a couple of these players are. And Apple just does, for as much as Apple has, one thing they don't have is as much unique data as Google or probably even OpenAI at this point in terms of what OpenAI has done with reinforcement learning from human feedback.
Apple, of course, passes on a lot. We don't know exactly how much, a lot of that data because of their privacy focus approach. And so they're not capturing a lot of that data that they could use. They, in my view, are capturing enough data where they can train a model that is going to be valuable enough to make their products more useful with AI. And we've in the past talked about this opportunity around personalized AI. And this would be an idea of a kind of a subscription service where Apple could you pay maybe $10 a month, and then it does some basic tasks for you. It can do calendar, obviously all the things around text and email, but maybe even do some customer support resolution, recommend different flights, travel. There's a lot of different ways that they could take it. Does partnering, let's say they go the route of partnering with OpenAI or Google, and this view that we have about their opportunity in personalized AI, wouldn't that dilute the fact that Google has just a whole different approach to their privacy? Would that dilute how Apple can approach a personalized AI product or maybe sell a personalized AI product?
I don't think so. And there's two things that go into that. One, I mean, almost everybody who uses Apple products also uses Google products. So, I mean, there's already, I think, an inherent level of trust or whatever you might want to call that in terms of the crossing of the user base there. So I don't personally think the privacy thing would be that big of a hurdle to figure out some workaround too, given that. But the other thing is this, the other piece of news that came out that was not as, I don't think, well reported or didn't have as much fanfare at least, was that one of Apple's AI researchers talked about a new paper that Apple had published about a multimodal model that Apple's been developing called the MM1. And so it's not that Apple's going to do nothing. I think it seems clear what they're looking to figure out is the MM1 is largely a smaller kind of parameter set model. I think the largest number of parameters in those models that they did the paper on was 30 billion. To put that into context, both Gemini and GPT-4 have been reported to have over 1 trillion. So well more than 20 times in terms of the
Orders of
parameter size.
magnitude difference here.
Significantly bigger. And what that means, though, specifically, is that when you have a smaller size model, the ability to run that locally on a device, like a phone maybe, is much greater. And so what you could see is Apple tries to figure out some LLM where they're handling some of the real specific stuff that people want to do locally on device, which could be calendaring and things like email. You know, they don't need to necessarily pass that off to Google. But when somebody asks a question that's beyond what is sort of native to that in-device experience, you know, like, okay, what's the capital of Rome? You know, or that is the a capital, right? Bad question, but hopefully AI would get it right. They would pass that off, right, to Google, because that's not something that is core and like needs an immediate response. You can have a second of latency, grab it from Gemini and bring it in.
I think either way you cut it, from Apple's perspective, they just start infusing AI into the products, whether it's through licensing to Google or it's their own model. I think that would be viewed as a win in investors' mind, just given haven't seen anything from them, or not much, nothing from generative AI. And so we're going to jump to the final topic, which is get to know Reddit. For those of you who have been living in a cave when it comes to meme stocks, this, of course, is a social platform that off Wall Street bets. Did I get that right, Doug? Off Wall Street bets?
Wall Street bets, just
Wall Street bets. Thank you. Made meme stocks, of course, part of our daily lives. And they are now ready to go public. Just a quick background on it is their private valuation peaked around $10 billion. It's looking to go public around six to 7 billion, something like that, kind of the initial valuation.
Yeah, 6.5.
6.5. And this is, they did last year 800 million in revenue, growing at 20%. And put that into perspective is Snap last year did just under 5 billion in revenue, growing at 14%. So Snap's market cap is 18 billion. And then here we have Reddit coming in at call it 6.5 billion market cap, with 1/4 of the revenue that Snap has. And it, the first blush, it just didn't really jive with me.
I think part of what is in the Reddit story that people are excited about is there is an AI angle, which is they've signed a deal with Google. I believe it's either $50 or $60 million a year, where Reddit is providing its data to Google to train on. And so I think there's some value, or at least theoretically, there's some value in their data on an ongoing basis, as you know, these subreddits that are in some ways sort of localized expert networks. You can question maybe sometimes how much expertise is really in the networks, but certainly there's a lot of knowledge about 100,000 different topics, right? There's 100,000 different communities, I believe, on Reddit right now. And so I think that that data is valuable, obviously, to Google. They're paying a lot of money for it. And I think that as part of that, you know, some investors are viewing Reddit as a potential AI beneficiary. I wouldn't go that far. I do think the data is useful, but I also think now we're seeing kind of what's the market price for it. Well, it's Google. It's mid 8 figures a year. maybe OpenAI goes and pays something similar. There's not many more customers that are probably going to be willing to pay that amount for that data. So certainly it could be a good tailwind and a persistent source of revenue. But I ultimately think the story about Reddit is going to be if they can monetize through ad dollars, probably not AI licensing dollars.
We'll obviously be staying tuned and following what happens on its IPO. On behalf of this episode of Deep Tech 315, that's Doug. I'm Gene. Bye for now.